Hi, everyone. My name is Jess, and I am the creator of the Sunshine Express, which is a new addiction recovery methodology that really focuses on creating a really dope and flexible core identity in addiction recovery and focuses on creative mastery and also joy, because I think that that's missing in a lot of our lives. Oh, and naps. We need a lot of naps. We need to bring nap time back. so, so today I really want to talk about deconstruction. Okay. I think that the term and phrase deconstruction is a very relatively new term within the last 2-3 years. Although people have been doing it for the past decade, I think the momentum really struck about 2 years ago, kind of coming out of the pandemic, right? So, what is deconstruction? Or I'll tell you what deconstruction is, and then I'll tell you what versions of deconstruction I did for myself. That's my email, sorry. What versions of deconstruction I did for myself, and then maybe that will give you a guide, like a little North Star to head towards. Oh, I have to do this and this and this and this, so you know what's coming next. Okay. So, so first, this is a really big topic, so I might be jumpy, but I think that it's necessary to really kind of dive into what we're deconstructing from. Because remember, if we're rebuilding a new identity in addiction recovery, we have to identify what that identity was before, right? We have to know what we're letting go of. A, to not make the same mistake, or B, to not put in the same version of what we're trying to detach from in the first place, right? So easily enough, when you go into addiction recovery, you're separating your identity from your non-sober self, your person, the person who needs the alcohol, the cigarettes, the weed, the whatever you're doing, the porn, whatever. We're separating, right? And so that's going to create this void, this gap, right? That we end up and eventually filling up with other things, different hobbies, meditation, non-alcoholic drinks, new communities, right? We're going to have so much new energy that you're going to bop around to different hobbies and different new groups and events. And, going to start walking around the world a lot more, taking new roads, taking new drives to different places that you've never been. Oh, I've never, been to Montana. I've never been to the Philippines. I've never been to Mongolia. You're going to start doing those things because you're going to have a lot more money and you're going to have a lot more energy and time on your hands. But so we're parsing apart the identity piece of this, right? And so the first thing that goes is this identity that we built on the drug of choice, right? For all intents and purposes, I'm going to say alcohol because that was mine, and also weed was, but I'm just going to use alcohol. You can kind of replace that with whatever drug of choice you had. But so when I was 15, I was actually a straight edge. Funnily enough, I grew up in like punk and ska culture, so I was always kind of on the fringe of things. And the reason why I started drinking was because I knew I wanted to go into creative consumer advertising when I was 15 years old, and I knew that like drinking and strip clubs were going to be a part of the game. And so I allowed myself to start drinking because I just knew that that's what was going to happen. And mind you, I didn't like think about this the first day in recovery. I didn't think about this the first year I was in recovery, right? This understanding of what my choices were and why I made those choices came like years after I got sober, right? This is the digging that you have to do. And so I allowed myself to go there, even though I was staunchly straight edge, because I was like, well, if I want to be successful, I have to be able to drink. And that right there, that is so quick. That line is so small, but that's all it is. It's that little phrase, well, I can do this because I have a justification for it, right? So those justifications kept getting more and more and more and more until alcohol and partying and brand creation, branding and design and creative consumer advertising in the 2010s became my identity. I wanted to be a creative director, but the creative director was also paired with open bars and mimosas at 10 a.m. and strip club lunches and all of that. But that was the lifestyle that I had seen other people do. So I was just mimicking what I had seen. And I was too young, and I think a little bit on the naive end, to really understand that A, you didn't have to drink. And also B, I was usually the only girl on these creative teams, woman. And what that ended up being like as well, right? So there were a lot of things that I eventually allowed because I had this justification for it. And that's not necessarily a thing that I am upset about. I'm not angry about that. I own it, personal accountability, right? But when I take it back, one of the things that I wanted to do was make a lot of money so I didn't have to live in the current circumstance that I was living in when I was 15 years old. So I was allowing myself to make these concessions to my straight edgedness, right? My righteous fucking attitude towards drugs and alcohol at the time. And I say righteousness in like a bad way. I was like, I didn't do it because I thought I was better than that, blah, 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 blah. And then I learned, over 10 years, I'm like, I'm not better than anyone, dude. So it doesn't matter if you're sober or not. It's just not like that. So anyway, but I had kept making these justifications for myself subconsciously, unconsciously. I don't even think that I knew that I was doing that because I, number one, was way too young to understand it. But number two, I just don't think I was self-aware at that point. And again, I'm not alleviating the personal accountability or personal responsibility that I have in this because these were all my choices. What I'm also saying is that sometimes you're just young and fucking dumb and you don't know what you're doing. So I go through this and I go through advertising agencies and, I was sexually harassed. But I also played into it a little bit. I'm not going to lie, because I was like, well, this is the game. I never slept with anyone to get to win a pitch or get a promotion or anything. I never did anything like that. But I did flirt with dudes because I was like, well, I'm playing the game, right? This is capitalism at its finest. Let's do this. People used to ask me, Jess, did you ever watch Mad Men? And I was like, no, I live it. What are you talking about? We go to the strip club 3 times a week for lunch, $5 lunch buffet, cheapest in the city. So it wasn't, this was the pinnacle of being an American capitalist, was working at an ad agency. And I really, really deeply wanted to work on Madison Avenue, but I didn't because I've been to New York a couple of times and I'm like, I don't like this place. So I stayed on the West Coast. And no shade to New York. It's a beautiful place. I just can't live there. And I know that I can't live there. It's too noisy for me. So I stayed around on the West Coast and I kind of bopped around there, and it was a lot of just seeing how the sausage was made. I was in the factory. I was experiencing all these things, and I would look around and I'm like, y'all are miserable as fuck. Y'all are so dead behind the eyes. And I kept engaging with people in marketing, and people I have worked with are going to be pissed that I say this. But it really was in that capacity where I was like, what the fuck is going on right now? Because I'm like, you're the ones that are supposed to be setting the culture and wealthy, and you have these big ad campaigns that sway millions of people to buy this product. And then I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, you guys are fucking empty. You're just so empty on the inside. And thank God that my primary reason for being there was being creative, because I knew the frequency in which I felt when I was being creative. And the creative ad agencies did not give me that frequency. They did not give me that emotional or energetic or spiritual home that I had grown so accustomed to by, working on my own creative projects since I was 5 years old. So it was just off. There was just something about it that I could not understand. I didn't have the words for it. I didn't have the emotional vocabulary, the emotional intelligence to really understand what was going on. Cue me eventually getting into recovery, right? So it took me years to dismantle what the fuck was happening. And as I get into sobriety, right, it's this deconstruction of identity from the reasons why you drank or the reasons why you used. But then to understand the environmental design, right? Your environmental design, who were you hanging out with and for why, right? You need to dig deep. I work with a lot of founders and CEOs in the Bay Area, and I learned from a person or 10 people I don't know at this point that you have to have 5 whys. You have to dig 5 layers of why whenever you're doing anything. And if you can't get to the 5th layer of why, you will lack the momentum to go the distance. And I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at things. So for a lot of my career, I would ask myself, why am I doing this? So anyway, so I took that concept and I put it into addiction recovery, and I was like, why? So when I went through the 12-step programs, I was looking at every one of these these steps on the 12-step recovery program. I'm like, why is it written like that? Why, what was the circumstance? What was the environmental design of each of these lines? What is the big book? Why was this written? Right? Being that annoying kid that never shuts up, never stops asking questions. But when you don't stop asking questions, you also uncover and reveal the deeper truths behind things. And I think that that's an important thing to really understand about yourself, is why, get to the deeper truth, because what you're really doing is remembering who you are and then uncovering who you are and discovering what you are capable of doing. And really what we're doing is we're taking out all of the crap that blocked us, disconnected us from being in touch with our soul frequency, our home frequency, that creative, primordial, calm, peace, joy, flow state that is in every single one of us. But we have been disconnected to for various reasons, right? Stress at work. Well, why work, right? So then we start deconstructing that. What is work, especially if you're in America? And I'm going to talk about this from the American lens, American perspective, which is work. The American identity is shopping, mostly football. If you don't work, you're lazy. And capitalism, right? That's really the American identity. Red, white, and blue, God, guns, and garbage on TV. That's what it is. And so when I started deconstructing my entire persona, my entire identity, and again, this didn't happen overnight. This took years to do. Because once I thought I was done with something new cropped up, and I was like, oh crap, I have to deal with this, and it's more painful. I'm like, oh, I have to walk towards this because I know that's it. Because it's so painful, I was like, that's the next wound. That's the next core wound I have to deal with. So the deconstruction was like, okay, the rock bottom was, I have to be sober. But then the next thing was, well, why did I have to drink in the first place? Oh, it's because I cultivated this entire identity around drinking. Why? Because that was my job. Well, okay, let's deconstruct. What was your whole job about? Capitalism. And I was like, oh, fuck. How do you deconstruct from capitalism at a time where deconstruction was not the mainstream vernacular or vocabulary about how to do this work? So it took me a while. It took me a while to really understand what this all was. Then when you start deconstructing from capitalism, because you're asking those why questions, because sometimes you just have to ask questions. You're not going to ask the right questions, but you will eventually get to the right thing you're trying to ask for, right? You just have to talk about it sometimes to get the energy stirring. And, here's what I'm thinking. I can't really figure out how to say this, but it sounds something like this, blah, 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 blah. And even if you don't get it right the first 10 times, it'll come. Okay. It will come. The right question, the right prompt will come. So that was a lot of what I was doing, was trying to figure out this new way to talk about this stuff, because you go through addiction recovery in the 12-step format, nobody's asking these questions. I walked in to 12-step programs with a whiteboard, and I would doodle UX UI wireframing and like bucketing certain things and visually drawing what people were saying. And people would ask me what I was doing, and I was like, I'm converting what you're saying into a graphic, and this is what you were talking about, right? And they were like, oh my God, yes, that's so correct. And I was like, well, this is a new way that I would want to do addiction recovery. And they're like, no, don't touch it. Don't touch it. Don't do it. Keep it what it is. I was like, why? People are fucking miserable in here. So I kept trying to understand what this was. And here's all this new vocabulary. I've never talked about my feelings before in my fucking life. So I have to learn emotional vocabulary and levels of consciousness and try to dodge what unhealthy versions of recovery there are in the world, and trying to like suss out. So I had to try everything, right? And I had to do some of the steps to be like, no, that's not the right way to do that. And I know that there's an easier way. I just don't know what that is, but I'll know it when I see it, right? How do you go around life? How do you go around something as complicated as addiction recovery and be like, maybe that's right? And you try it out for 3 weeks, and you're like, no, I hate that. And you go on and you try new things until you're like, shit, this doesn't work either. This doesn't work either. This doesn't work either. And you do that so many times, or I did that so many times, where I eventually was like, well, I'm just a freaking scientist at this point. I'm like some sort of innovator, right? I'm some sort of explorer of life, where I'm like, this is stuff that people have not done. There's no guidebook. There's no Google entry that I could type in and somebody has a 15-year long blog going about the subject. No, I was the one writing those blogs. So when you do that, you become a very interesting person, number one. But number two is that you get to this place, and this might be the addiction, the addictive tendencies that I have, which is I can't leave any stone unturned. I can't do that, because it would be untrue to A, myself, but B, to the research that I had somehow accumulated over these years. I didn't even know I was going and doing research, right? Until I was like, oh no, I see a lot of patterns. I see a lot of data that I think is really pertinent for other people to know about. Because if collectively I've interviewed 1,000 people, quote unquote interviewed, I've heard their testimonies, and I'm like, well, I know how to bridge testimonies together because that's what I've been doing for 10 years professionally. Then this wouldn't make sense for me to do anything other than that with this information. So the deconstruction kept happening, and it wasn't just deconstruction of capitalism then. It went into America as a whole. And when you start deconstructing America as a whole, well, that's a real big mess. It's a real big mess. Okay. But so as I go on with my explorer hat on, there's more to it. Then you have to start deconstructing from whiteness. You have to start deconstructing from the patriarchy. You have to deconstruct from mass marketing. You have to deconstruct from Hollywood. You have to deconstruct from evangelical religion, Christianity. You have to deconstruct from all religions to really understand where the root of all of this is coming from. What causes poverty? Oh, shit. Well, that's a really big question, right? So as you go down this path, or as I went down this path, the answers would come, but it would lead to more questions. And I think that everyone has their limit on how many questions they're willing to ask, because when you get to the very root of it, you're going to have to make a lot of peace with your mortality. I ended up doing 4 years of daily Buddhist death meditation, and that was like one of the most phenomenal things I've ever done. If I were early on sobriety, I wish somebody told me about Buddhist death meditations, but if I'm being honest with myself, I might have heard that, and then I would probably be like, I'm not going to do that. But man, do I wish that somebody had been like, Jess, the way forward is to do Buddhist death meditations. Okay, just do them every day for a year and see how your life goes. And I cannot tell you how I think that my life would have gone, but I think it would have been freaking amazing. So, and I mean, everyone discovers things when they're ready to discover them. That's the point of discovery. If you're not looking for it, you're not going to be open to that as the answer. So at this point, this is years in, I've deconstructed from addiction. I've deconstructed from understanding my family lineage and mental illnesses and, generational poverty, addiction, all of that has been passed down to me. I've deconstructed from that. I've ended that chain, And then I've went on to deconstruct the country that I've grown up in and was more or less, to use this word, indoctrinated with history that may or may not have been correct. Because upon further inspection, upon further research, I was like, oh, I was not taught 90% of this in school. And mind you, I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in liberal woke town, and I still didn't know a lot of the stuff that I have learned over the last 5 years. And to be fair, I don't think it was accessible in the way that it is nowadays because of social media and the way that like podcasts and just general digital media has taken shape. Because we didn't have smartphones in 1996, So there is not much blame I can put on the American school system or culture in general for not teaching me the things that I should have known growing up, because it just wasn't the time for that. I'm not going to take that blame, right? However, as I deconstructed and I learned new things, I now take that responsibility to make sure that I'm doing the due diligence work now that I have the information at my fingertips to learn, and to make sure that I am course correcting myself as best as possible, give grace. So when you start deconstructing what it means to be un-American, right? Now you're digging into a whole shitstorm of part of you is now like having that void state happen again, right? You're basically going in and you're doing soul surgery and you're taking out a piece of you and you're going, well, this is my American identity. I don't even know what this means, right? Because every single person, depending on who you are, if you are a first gen immigrant, if you are a white person in America, if you are a black person in America, you are going to have a vastly different cultural experience and identity association of what it means to be American. Some people are really proud to be American. Some people are really shamed to be an American, but they don't have the means or resources to move abroad, right? So we continue to understand that deconstruction has more pieces if you keep pulling at those strings. So I would say that addiction recovery is really the first 3 months of this whole fucking thing. Addiction recovery is just the first little point on the map. And then you go through and you're like, oh crap, okay, I have to figure out why the hell I drank in the first place. I need to find things to replace the time I spent drinking or doing whatever. I'm like, okay, instead of drinking, I'm going to go meditate. Instead of drinking, I'm going to go on a Friday night, I'm going to go to the salsa class. Instead of drinking, I'm going to go work out, right? And then you're like, oh, I have so much time and free energy and my skin's clearing up and I have better sleep. Okay. The buck does not stop there. And if you think it stops there, you have not done the work all the way to the 100 degree that you can. You could stop there if you want. And I'm not going to shame you because the next part of it is really intense. And I think what ends up happening is that because of the way the 12-step program is functioning, it doesn't move you to deconstruct further other than I'm an alcoholic and that's your new identity. And if you remove your identity, your addiction identity, and you replace it with I'm a recovering alcoholic, and that's all you know for the rest of your sober life is that you're just an addict, that's not the full picture. And I hope people understand that, because what you have to then do is continue to ask yourself, well, fucking why is that? Why is that? Why are the 12 steps written like that? Why is the Eightfold Noble Path written like that? Why is our political system like this? Because if you look at the 12-step program, it was primarily written for middle-class white men. That's where it got started. And you can fact check me there, because there is a whole section in there called wives. And if you read the wives section, you will understand what I'm saying. When we deconstruct and start decentering all of these things that propped up our identity, what we end up doing is detaching from all of this shit. And there is a grieving process. You have to go through survivor's guilt. You have to go through the feeling of being alone. You are lonely, okay? You think that there is nobody else going through this because you are in this freaking hole of, I don't know who I am. There is not one person on the face of the planet that can tell me that they feel this endless, deep hole in your body. And I can tell you, yes, there's a bunch of us that have gone through that, but it doesn't make it suck any less. And when you realize what that hole is, which is this void, a blank canvas for you to start putting whatever the hell you want to actually put in there, not what other people are telling you, not what society is telling you, not what your family is telling you, not what your job is telling you, not what your patriotism is telling you, not what your country is telling you, not what your job, not what your doctors, not what your blah, 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 blah. Not what anyone else is telling you, except for what you want to do. When you start filling that hole with the things that you want to create, with what you want to enjoy, with what you want to research, and do your thorough research. Read all opinions about it. Read all from every angle. Okay, that's what makes a good artist. You're looking at different perspectives constantly. You start filling that gap up. And people associate this to God or higher power or whatever. And if the more that you listen to me, I'll start talking in this energetic speak, which I think that God, higher power, whatever, is just the same. Like if I say the term high frequency energy, it's the same stuff. It's getting you to a higher level of consciousness. And so like, let's just say you're at 0 when you go into addiction recovery, right? You detach from the things that were weighing you down, your addiction, the messes you were getting into, the drama that was being created, the blah, 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 because you would black out for 4 hours, and you would run into the streets and piss people off, blah, blah, blah. Well, now that's all gone. You detached from it. And because of that, you go into this void state. And during that void state, your eyes become open, right? And then you start shifting upwards. You go to if you think of this as a video game, level 1, level of consciousness. And you go, oh shit, I'm in pain. This is painful. And then you're going to go around doing your little, like, where do I go? Blah, blah, blah. And you go on your little quest. And then eventually you'll meet somebody that kind of has the answer. And then you'll be at that level of consciousness. And then you'll be satiated enough, but there'll be a new quest, right? And then you have to detach from all of the shit that you just did that's weighing you down. And you have to move up, right? And that's how deconstruction eventually happens anyway. Because everything carries an energetic weight. So eventually, it doesn't matter what, you will have to shed these skins. You also shed these layers because they're just too heavy for you to keep carrying on. If you want to go the full adventure, if you want to go the full ride, the journey inward, whatever, you're going to have to shed a lot of the weight. That might be consumerism. Okay. Your identity is going to fold and change on a daily basis. And we have to get used to the fact that we're constantly deconstructing. We're constantly taking personal accountability. We're constantly learning. We're constantly growing. It's like a steam engine, right? You're putting stuff in the steam, like it's being converted into fuel and then it's leaving, right? And you constantly have to put that steam in, but you're also constantly letting shit go. The law of detachment and the law of expansion, simultaneous things, they go hand in hand. In order to expand, you have to let go of shit. What that shit is going to be different for every single person going through addiction recovery. I can't tell you what that is. I can kind of tell you what it's going to be. It's going to be your childhood trauma. It's going to be any resentment that you're carrying, any doubts, any anxiety. That's the stuff that you're going to start letting go of. Who are you without your mental illness? Because the more that you do this work and the more that you understand what pre-colonized spirituality is, well, that's going to make you feel a little bit more sane. So, deconstruction in sobriety is something where you have to really commit and you can walk away at any point in time. But deconstructing your entire self, your entire personality, your entire persona, your entire personhood to understand really why are you the way that you are? And how do you want to move forward? And what things do you want to create? And how do you want to take this information and turn it into absolute joy? How are you going to take what you learn and turn it into a reconstruction? Okay. Sobriety is about building a core identity that you fucking love. So why wouldn't you take apart the pieces that are unfunctional, non-functional, dysfunctional, and turn it into the fucking coolest shit on the face of the planet? That's what you get to do. And if you stop midway or you stop, at just doing the 12-step program, you are not seeing 95% of it. So find yourself in wherever you are and whatever map you want to create in your head about where you are on this level of consciousness. How much have you actually deconstructed? I was talking to this guy once who was a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I was a white belt. But and he was sober a couple of years, and I had been sober for about 7 years, and I had told him, I was like, it's funny because you're a white belt. I was like, you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but you're a white belt in sobriety. and I'm a white belt in jiu-jitsu and I'm a black belt in sobriety. And he kind of like poked his ego about that because he was like, I'm not a blue belt. I was like, no, you're not a blue belt. And I could tell that he was confused because he had been sober for a couple of years. But the one thing that he hadn't done, and I had, active listening is a thing that you learn how to do. The things that he had told me had pointed me to know that he had not chosen himself. He hadn't chosen to be himself. He was choosing to do what everyone else was telling him. And I go, that's not the marker of somebody who would have a blue belt. The second you've climbed the ladder a little bit. There's a lot of people who will do many creative hobbies, but they'll only scratch the surface. And I was like, you can sit there and be in the recovery rooms all you want, and you can go through the 12-step program all you want. But if you don't understand that you have to choose yourself, that's the tenet of AA, to thine own self be true. Choose yourself. Then you will never get to a blue belt level, no matter how long you're in the recovery rooms. You have to choose yourself. And that requires deconstruction. And that requires facing parts of you that you may not want to deal with, to face. And it's funny because like a year later, or actually I was just talking to him a couple of weeks ago, and I had noticed that his profile name had changed on Instagram. So I messaged him about it. We hadn't spoken in like months or whatever. And it was really funny because I had asked him, why did you change your Instagram handle? And he had changed his photo to like a kind of a punky photo of himself. And he goes, oh, I've chosen myself. I decided to own who I am. And in my head, I go, oh, you've earned your blue belt. I never told him that. Maybe I should. But anyway, but that would have required him to have some, come to self moments. He had to have gone through a deconstruction of some sort. And unfortunately, I have not been able to get coffee from him because I really want to know what happened. Decaf coffee. I don't drink coffee. But to understand that is a huge part of this. It's choosing yourself, and it doesn't matter how long you've been in recovery for. It doesn't matter how long you've been sober for. If you're not choosing who you are and deciding to deconstruct your identity and your persona, there is absolutely no point in doing any of this other than not drinking and driving. So deconstruct, the whole concept of deconstruction and decentering. And if you want to go even further, decenter men and decenter romantic relationships and decenter sex and decenter other things, energy drinks, porn. I know energy drinks is weird, but it kind of goes hand in hand with people who are addicted to porn. I don't know why. Comorbidities, they call it, co-addictions. Decenter gambling, decenter trading stocks, decenter capitalism, decenter money. I took a vow of poverty, vow of celibacy, vow of sobriety. So I have some really interesting things to say about money and what I call wealth hoarding, because I think that everyone has their limits on when wealth hoarding becomes an actual psychosis. You can see it in billionaires all the time. And a lot more to that. So keep asking the questions. It should feel like you're interacting with new frequencies every single day. If you're doing the work properly, and if you're doing that, you should constantly be shedding things. And granted, at the beginning, it might be a slow go because you're kind of like getting your bearings and you're taking a lot of naps, and naps are very good. Naps, every time you take a nap, it's a new frequency. So just remember that. Every time you go to sleep, it's a new frequency. So you should be interacting with these new feelings almost every day, these new dimensions of life almost every day, if not multiple times a day. And as you walk through those portals or those wormholes, or those wormholes or whatever to get to the next dimensions of life, of your inner self, of your past lives, of your ancestral dimensions, of your lineage, of your whatever, collective humanity that we need to all heal from because we have deep wounding that goes to the primordial source. And as you walk through those things, you're flipping over every stone and you're starting to learn about them and doing the research, doing the healing, and like letting it out of your body. As you're doing those things, you are doing the work to suture up that giant hole that you felt years ago. And after you do this process of decentering all of this stuff, and again, you might have to deconstruct from the different systems. And there are some things that I haven't been through. So like if you were homeless, or if you were a survivor of domestic violence, or if you were assaulted or whatever, or you spent a significant time in jail or prison, you might have to do some deconstruction work around that and lift that negativity and take all of the negativity from that and transmute it and alchemize it and create from it a new system in which we can live, in which we can step into. That is your job. That is your purpose. Okay. My life story is a completely different thing. So I'm taking all the things that I can from my life experience and from what I have accumulated over my 35 years of life, and I'm building out this other new system. So we are constantly participating in this ever expanding understanding of the infinite amounts of creativity that can happen in the world. And you are part of it. And the more that you are sober, the more that you do this work of turning over the internal stones, detaching from old frequencies, allowing the new frequencies to come in, and they're going to feel fucking weird at first because it's a new experience, but then you get used to it. The more that we're allowed to do that, the more that we can lift other people up. And it doesn't have to be this weird fear-mongering bullshit. It doesn't have to be that. It can be cool. It can be exciting. It could be dope as hell. It can be filled with art and creativity and fun and joy. And there's no reason for the other crap. But you have to get to that level of consciousness in order to be able to create at that level of consciousness, if that makes any sense. So if you are stuck in early sobriety and you have so much anxiety and you have so much fear, you cannot create from a state of perpetual joy if you've never experienced perpetual joy. How would you know? Because you've never done it before, right? So you have to do the work to clear all that fear out, whatever it may be. You might have to take, some time to really understand your ancestral roots. And then you get to collect all of that data and knowledge and create something really cool out of it. Deconstruction only leads to reconstruction, but we build it better because that's what we get to do. Because that's really what our soul is calling us to do. Your addiction is just a blocker between you and your soul. And that's really fucking cool when you choose yourself enough that you get in touch with that part of yourself, that you go and create the most badass shit that you could have ever conceived, and even more than that. All right, y'all. That's it for tonight. Have a good one.